welcome to the lighter side of the dark side. It's your weekly freak show here on Renegade Radio, Steel Waves Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, everywhere you listen to podcasts. It's the Dark Mark Show. I am Dark Mark, the goth comedian. I'm by myself today. It's a long story. Unfortunately, I was supposed to be with the lovely Bree Walker, who has been our guest, and hopefully we'll be able to get a recap from her or do a political show at some point. But I'm very honored to have this guy on, because I don't know who I'm voting for president, to be honest with you. I know I'm not voting for Trump. I know I'm not voting for Biden. So far, I think my vote is going to this guy right here, Howie Hawkins. How are you, Mr. Hawkins?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
And I want to give people a little context to who you are, if they don't know. And I didn't know a lot of things about you, but you're a working guy. You're a guy who worked at the lowly dock for UPS for a number of years. You're a union guy, veteran, former Marine. And what I didn't know, and I was very interested to find out, you were very much responsible for the Green Party forming, and you were the one who first proposed the Green New Deal before any of these people. Before AOC, before Bernie, any of that. Is that all true?
That's all true. Long before they did. I mean, I ran on it as a slogan, Green New Deal, in 2010, running for governor of New York. But that was the first year. I mean, I'm talking about these policies since the 1970s. I was one of the co-founders of the Clamshell Alliance, which occupied the nuclear power plant construction site at Seabrook, New Hampshire. We got 1,414 people arrested. We were put in National Guard armories for 10 days. We were on a cover of Newsweek, Time, everything.
Wow.
And the anti-nuclear movement exploded. And until the Obama administration, no nuclear power plants were ordered. And at that time, we called ourselves the anti-nuclear / safe energy movement. And we were worried about climate change, as well as the pollutant, the air pollution from fossil fuels back then, and have been advocating, let's build out a clean energy system based on renewables like solar and wind. And made the argument. We had a group back then called Environmentalists for Full Employment. And we were saying there are more jobs in building out this clean energy system than there is in continuing with fossil and nuclear fuels. So I've been on this issue for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
But in 2010...
I agree with you. I don't know how people even make the other argument.
Well, it's not an argument based on the science or the economics. It's based on the special interests.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
absolutely.
The Exxons and the Mobils and the Chevrons, the Texacos have had enormous influence on domestic as well as foreign policy. And the nuclear industry has ties to the military-industrial complex. So they were, back in the Eisenhower administration, they were worried about running out of oil in the Truman administration. And they formed a commission called the Paley Commission, which asked, what are we going to do after we run out of oil? Now, with fracking, we're still not even close to that. But that's the question they asked. And the answer they gave to Eisenhower was, our future is solar. But Eisenhower, given the nuclear arms race, said, we're going with the peaceful atom, which is partly a PR thing, partly a sop to Westinghouse and GE and those people in the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower understood. And that decision was made not in an election, not in a discussion in Congress. It was just made by the military-industrial elites. We're going nuclear. So, this has been the conclusion of that commission was we should go solar. That's now 65 years ago.
Yeah, in the 50s they said to go solar, and I just and here's the thing: I've been spoiled. I've always voted either in California or New York, and there's always been a Green Party candidate for president when I voted, but I didn't know that was not something to take for granted. Today, you actually just won ballot access in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and the Democrats are appealing. If they put as much effort trying to keep us off the ballot, if they put as much effort into fighting voter suppression of black voters and other likely Democratic voters like students. We have the same case in Wisconsin.
Right.
And there, the Republicans have got voter ID and voter roll purges going on that really diminishes the black vote in Milwaukee and the student vote in Madison. And because of that, the Democrats keep losing races. And they're putting all this effort into keeping us off the ballot. We needed 2,000 signatures. We collected over 6,000. Now you can only submit 4,000. And the staff said 3,200 or something were good signatures. But they're trying to knock us off on a technicality because my running mate, Angela Walker, moved during the petitioning period.
Mm-hmm.
So they were saying some of those petitions had the wrong address. But when she moved, we contacted the Wisconsin Election Commissions and said, what should we do? And we followed their instructions. Yet the Democrats are trying to bleed us dry in these court cases. I think we're going to win in Wisconsin.
There's this misconception that because of Jill Stein, that's why Trump was elected, because they had her votes up and they had the votes that she was shy in certain states. However, they don't count the libertarians that voted for Gary Johnson that would have voted for Trump. It has nothing. Put up with a decent candidate, you're going to win. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, before you ever get to Jill Stein, you got black voter suppression. You got the Electoral College.
Yeah.
The Greens didn't do any of those things. And then exit polls showed 61% of Stein voters would have stayed home if she'd not been on the ballot.
But what they don't say is that Gary Johnson got twice as many votes as Jill Stein, and those votes probably would have gone Republican, most of them.
Sorry, the phone rang. What was the question?
No, I said that Gary Johnson had twice as many votes as Jill Stein, and most of those probably would have gone Republican if they didn't go to Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate.
Yeah, well, actually, you look at the exit polls. In both cases, about 14 or 15% of the Stein and Johnson votes would have gone to Trump. Yeah. About a quarter would have gone to Clinton. And in Johnson's case, 55% would have stayed home.
Why should people vote for you to be president?
Because I'm the strongest anti-Trump vote, particularly in a state like California where you are, or New York where I am. In New York, Biden's been consistently 25% or more ahead.
Yeah.
In California, I think it's in the 30s. I mean, it's not even close. So the question is, if you're a progressive and you want what the Greens stand for, a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, taxing the rich to make sure our social services and our environmental protection are funded, student debt relief, tuition-free public college. We can go down the whole list of programs that progressives want. If you want those things, vote for those things. That's the Green Party. If you vote for Biden and you want those things, Biden's opposed to all of those things. You get lost in the sauce. They don't know you want those things. You voted for Biden.
Sure.
You give away your voice. You give away your power. So people should vote for me if they're progressives, because we have a progressive platform. And whoever's in office has to respect that. If we don't register what we want in the polls at the vote, then we're invisible and we get taken for granted. The Democrats think they got all the progressives in their back pocket, and then they go fishing to the right for more votes, and they accommodate the Republicans and keep moving everything to the right. So we got to hold our ground and vote for what we want. That's our power. That's our leverage politically.
And I agree with that. And I've always voted. That's why I vote third party. And I've always been in states where New York and California, Democrats going to win anyway. So my vote doesn't count. The presidency, honestly.
Oh, it does count. It's your voice.
It counts if you vote for who you want. Yes.
Yeah. No, look, when I got 5% running against Andrew Cuomo for governor in 2014, that was the year he wanted to run up the vote to get ready to run for president. Wanted to get more than his father, Mario Cuomo, ever got. Get more than he got when he was first elected in 2010. And he got substantially less because we had 5% of the vote.
Yeah.
He couldn't take us for granted. And after that election, he adopted several policies he had never supported that were in our platform. A ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, an extension of the millionaire's tax, and paid family leave. So it does count. It does matter.
Right.
It doesn't maybe affect who actually wins the office, but it counts in the political process.
Well, it counts that every time I voted for who I thought would make the best president, and I don't know a lot of people that can say that. But let's go to individual because I know I have limited time with you. Let me get to individual things that you're supporting. You're supporting, now, first off, what were you going to do about the COVID crisis that 6 months later is still going on?
Invoke the Defense Production Act and have a federal program so everybody can get tested frequently, do contact tracing so those who are exposed can be traced and quarantined to see if they were infected. And that's how we suppress community spread of the virus. We've seen it done all across the Pacific Rim, from New Zealand to South Korea, in many countries of Europe, in most organized societies in the world, even countries like Burundi and Thailand. But we can't seem to do it. And so that, that's what we should do. Now, Trump, he should have been the hero of this. He should have listened to the public health advice he got. And, he could have said, I saved us from COVID. Instead, he gave up. He's a loser. But what did Biden do? He's been the presumptive nominee since March. He lives within commuter distance of the White House press corps. He could have convened them for socially distanced news conferences and pounded away, test, trace, and quarantine. That's what we need right now. And while he was at it, he could say, we need to save the post office. We need a universal mail-in ballot option. We need that 600 unemployment supplement from the federal government extended, and so forth. Instead, he's kind of sat back and watched Trump hang himself on his own words. But we're in an emergency. We're approaching 200,000 deaths. The most recent study from University of Washington on the epidemiology says we're going to have that doubled by election day, 400,000 deaths. And I think that makes Biden complicit because he hasn't used the platform he has to provide the leadership he says he wants to provide. So I'm starting to get as mad as him as I am at Trump. Yeah,
I tend to agree with you. I mean, they both have a pulpit, and you gotta, I know that it's there's a presidential election, but you got to put the country above political strategy. And I mean, I know that, for instance, Andrew Yang helped the president with the checks that went out to people. And he didn't have to do that, but he did it. And that's one of your programs. He wanted to send $1,000 to everybody in the country. You want to spend $2,000 to everybody in the country every month. Is that correct?
Yes, for the duration of the emergency. And that would be put into the tax structure so the people that don't really need it would pay some taxes on it. Longer term, we want a guaranteed income above poverty, just build it into the tax structure. So if your income is below the poverty line, the real poverty line should be about double what it is now. If you look at self-sufficiency budgets to pay for basic needs, housing, rent, utilities, food, and so forth, it should be about double what it is. But anyway, if you're below, the government will send you money to get you up above the poverty line. If you're above, you would pay progressive taxes. So that program would cost, at double the current poverty rate, about $400 billion a year. Yang's proposal gives $1,000 to Donald Trump and to Warren Buffett and to Steve Bezos, who don't need it. And that in total costs $3.5 trillion, which is pretty expensive. So, I believe everybody should have the right to an income above poverty.
And what's your definition of poverty? What's the poverty line?
I'm sorry, what?
What's your definition of poverty? What's the poverty line?
Well, the poverty line we have now is inadequate. It's 3 times a modest food budget as calculated in the late 50s. And they adopted that in the mid 60s. And since then, food inflation has been low, but housing, healthcare, and college costs have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
So it's really inadequate. And so the self-sufficiency budgets I was referring to, when you calculate that, so people can pay for their basic needs, a house, shelter over them, their food, their utilities, then it comes to about double the current poverty line. So that's another thing we do. We'd raise the poverty line.
Okay. So what would the poverty line be in that case?
Well, let's see. Right now for an individual, it's about $13,000 a year.
Okay.
So it would be about $26,000 a year.
Okay. So
and in our
anybody that makes under $26,000 a year gets an extra $2,000 basically doubles their salary.
Well, if they were making $13,000 income, they get $13,000 over the year from the federal government to bring them up to the poverty line.
Right.
So it adjusts to your need. The problem I have with Yang's proposal is it's just $1,000. Even for an individual, that isn't quite the poverty line.
Right.
And it goes to people that don't need it, and it's more expensive. So I think it should be a guaranteed income above poverty. That's what Martin Luther King was demanding when they marched on Washington in the Poor People's Campaign. He never made it, of course, because he was assassinated, but that came out of the civil rights movement.
And but would the argument against that would be then inflation would go up and the poverty line would be inadequate in that case if everybody had
well, you would adjust the poverty line to the cost of living.
Okay.
And adjust the supplement the government would provide if you're below the poverty line accordingly.
And you're also saying as long as we have the COVID crisis, no foreclosures, right? No cutoff of electric, phones, gas, or anything like that.
Yes, and what we'd have the federal government do is pay those on behalf of homeowners and mortgage holders.
Okay.
And that benefit would be put into the tax structure. So if you're high income, you would pay some taxes on it. But these are emergency measures to just keep the money flowing. Now, in the case of housing, you don't want to force landlords and all the businesses that depend on property services and management to have no income and go bankrupt, particularly mom and pop, landlords, which account for about half of the rental housing in the country. Then you're just creating a worse problem because you're making a lot of businesses go out of business, people lose their jobs, and
that's what we're seeing now.
That's what we're seeing now, yeah.
Yeah.
So
and the other thing that you're running on Medicare for all. Everybody gets Medicare. Now, as you know, being recently retired, Medicare doesn't cover everything.
Right.
Do people have to get a Medicare supplement plan or?
No, this would be, we call it full and improved Medicare. It would cover all medically necessary services with no out-of-pocket costs, no co-pays, premiums, deductibles, or out-of-pocket costs for uncovered services. So it would be improved Medicare, and it would cover everybody. And it would actually be cheaper than if we keep going with the system we're at. I used to get so angry at those Democratic primary debates where, everybody pushing the public option while keeping private insurance were, telling Sanders and Warren that Medicare for all costs too much. Well, you know what? They should have said, no, your plan costs more, because the projections under the ACA, if I remember the numbers right, Medicare for all is about 30 trillion over 10 years. What we got now is about 35 trillion over 10 years.
Right.
Because you got this massive overhead with hundreds of private insurance companies and every medical provider having to figure out if the patient is covered, what's the plan, they got to look it up, then they got to bill. And sometimes the companies say, no, we're not paying, and they fight over it. That takes about a third of our healthcare spending. It's insane.
I used to work at Blue Shield. That used to be my job.
Imagine.
I used to work at Blue Shield. That used to be my job. I used to work at a Medicare supplement plan and figure out what's covered, what's not, and go between the doctor and the patient. That was my job.
Yeah, well, in our Medicare for All plan, we would provide training to you so you could actually deliver health care, in some form, rather than push papers.
Now, I know you're running on the Socialist USA Party as well. The argument, of course, to this is that the health care is not going to be as good, and you're going to have to wait for it, and there's no motivation to treat older people that have fatal diseases and things like that.
Well, no, I don't believe that at all. We spend more than twice as much as any other country, and we don't cover everybody. And where they do have public health insurance plans, it's really up to us. What the plan that we're pushing is, we call it a community-controlled national health service. So we're not only socializing the payments through a single payer, but we're socializing the delivery. So hospitals and clinics are publicly owned. doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers are salaried public employees. And then we have locally elected health boards that administer the system locally, and from there elect state and national boards to coordinate the system overall. So we will have a voice in how the system's administered. And if we don't like the way they're treating the old people and not giving them the full care they need, we can say so. If we're in a community like the one I live in, has no doctors, no clinics, people got to walk 2 miles, half the people don't have cars, to get to the community health center where they get their Medicaid, or up the hill if they got other insurance or Medicare, to the hospitals near Syracuse University. We can, if we had this, we could speak up for our community and saying, you need to put some health care resources in our neighborhood too. So how that works out will be under community control, and we will have a voice. You know, I'm in the Medicare system. I got a billing dispute with them. I'm having a hell of a time getting a live person on the other end of the phone so we can look at what I paid. I think I sent them a check and they didn't put it in my account, although they get cash.
You're giving me flashbacks now.
Yeah.
You're going to have to put me on the clock now. You're giving me flashbacks. But also, now let's talk about obviously the environment. The Green Party is about green energy and taking care of fossil fuels. And you want to make fossil fuels, eliminate them in 10 years.
Yes.
That's gas, that's coal, that's oil, all that.
Right.
Is that feasible?
It's technically feasible. We have engineers out there in California like Mark Jacobson who've been demonstrating this now for over a decade. I remember back in 2009, it was on the cover of Scientific American, how we could do it for the whole world. It was technically and economically feasible. And that was like a summary article, and the details were published in I forget the name of the journal right now, but a peer-reviewed journal. So the real question is the political will, and I think the willingness to do this through the public sector. You know, if we try to do it with tax incentives and regulations and mandates, the vested interests are going to fight us and gum up the whole works. We need to do like we did during the World War II emergency, when the federal government, through the War Planning Board and the Office of War Mobilization, took over or built a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of the United States in order to turn industry on a dime into the arsenal of democracy to arm the allies against the fascist Axis powers. We need to do nothing less to make this rapid transition through the public sector to get to clean energy. I mean, here's where we are. The last International Panel on Climate Change report on staying below 1.5 degrees rise in Celsius said we have a global carbon budget of 420 gigatons carbon. And we're emitting 42 tons of gigatons carbon a year. That was 3 years ago. We have 7 years left before we're going to blow through that budget. And on the other side of that threshold is catastrophic climate change. This is such a serious emergency. And of course, Trump calls it a climate change a hoax, but I'm afraid the Democrats are acting as if it's a hoax, because you look at their climate policies, they're totally inadequate to the crisis.
But one of the arguments to this would be, even if we clean up our act completely, if we can clean it up in 10 years, no emissions, no fossil fuels, which is to me a serious challenge. I mean, we're talking about all the airplanes, all the cars, everything. There's still China, there's still India, and they're polluting as much as we are, if not more.
Yeah, China's polluting more now.
Yeah.
China is really destroying the environment, their own environment, and they have this Belts and Roads Initiative, which plans 700 coal plants to power that infrastructure.
Right.
It's a climate bomb. And we need to talk to them about that. But I think if we set a good example, then we have some credibility.
Okay.
You know, if everybody sits around and say, you go first, nobody's going to go. We got to go first and provide the leadership and also demonstrate that this is an economic boom. I mean, we have an eco-socialist Green New Deal budget on my website, howiehawkins.us. People can look at it. It's $27.5 trillion over 10 years to rebuild all our productive systems for 0 to negative carbon emissions and 100% clean energy. It creates 30 million jobs. And that's what we need right now. This is now the economic recovery program as well as the climate safety program.
Well, I was gonna get to that. How do people get employed again? How do we get the jobs back? How do we get new jobs?
Well, we're going to build a public energy system, which requires going from servo-mechanical grids to smart grids to accommodate the distributed nature of solar and wind energy. We're going to rebuild all our industrial processes for clean energy and zero emissions. So Portland cement, that accounts for 5% of the world's carbon emissions because you put calcium carbonate in it, and the calcium hardens the cement, but the carbonate evaporates into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So we need a new kind of cement factory. Or take steel production. You know, now they use coke ovens, although they're starting to move toward electric arc furnaces. But they're not going to move to those electric arc furnaces until they wear out the coke ovens. So we've got to take it into the public sector and accelerate that. And so, you know, we go through all the productive systems that make those changes. And that's how, you know, building these new Green New Deal factories is one way we employ a lot of people. We employ 4 million people alone in the new Civilian Conservation Corps. So we can replant these forests that are burning down and restore ecosystems and habitat. So we have less species extinctions, which destroy ecosystems, which will destroy agriculture. I mean, there's so much work to do restoring our environment. So there's a lot of work to be done there.
And there's one candidate that's talking about, and that's Howie Hawkins. Now, I could talk to you forever, but I've got just a few more questions, and I'll let you go because I know we have limited time. The military. You want to get out. You want to get out of all the wars, which I agree with. Pull out of the Middle East, all of that, right?
Yes.
And the argument against that is, if you do that, then the Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, it's all going to destabilize. They're all going to attack Israel. It's going to be chaos. And right now we're holding it together. We can't do that.
No, we destabilize them by intervening, going back to the Carter administration, when we started supporting the Islamic fundamentalists against the government of Afghanistan. And it was Brzezinski's strategy to draw in the Russians or the Soviets into their own Vietnam. And that totally destabilized Afghanistan. And then we invaded Iraq in 2003. It's still a mess. We're now engaged in 14 shooting wars where U.S. troops are engaged in combat.
Right.
It keeps accelerating, and we're creating more terrorists than we're killing because we do these drone strikes. And too many civilians are killed. Then they get mad and they want to get revenge. It's understandable. Tomorrow is 9/11, and we use it as a celebration for militarism. You know, we should listen to the CIA concept of blowback. When we go mess in other people's business, they get mad and come back at us.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, what happened with even with the Democratic leadership, Libya was a disaster.
Yeah, Libya, the coup in Honduras, they grabbed Zelaya in his pajamas and flew him out of the country. They did the same thing to Aristide in Haiti. He landed in Africa still in his pajamas. It's crazy. We have no right to do that. And then, you know, you look at the Pew polling organization has polled the world and asked what country is the greatest threat to peace. And the U.S. always comes up on top of those polls because we're fighting all over the world. We have over 800 foreign military bases, and we think we're exceptional. We can tell other people what to do, but they shouldn't, you know, mess with us. That just doesn't work. So what we're calling for are peace initiatives because we're into a new nuclear arms race. We are modernizing our nuclear weapons. Started that under Obama, it's continued under Trump. It's destabilized the nuclear balance of terror. The Russians and the Chinese have followed suit. So now the bullets and the atomic scientists, as their doomsday clock, the closest it's ever been to midnight.
Right.
So we're calling for deep cuts in military spending. An orderly withdrawal.
When you say deep, you mean like 75%.
75%, right. And we'll still have the world's largest military budget. an orderly withdrawal out of all these foreign military bases and wars, pledging no first use of nuclear weapons, disarming to a minimum credible deterrent, and then going to the other nuclear powers and saying, okay, we're not threatening you anymore. Let's agree to complete and mutual nuclear disarmament, because these weapons should never be used. Because if we start using them, nobody's going to win. Everybody's going to lose. It's going to be basically the end of humanity.
Right. And
we should go there with world public opinion. 3 years ago, 122 nations agreed to a new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. And hardly anybody in our country knows that, because the political leadership of both parties, all the presidential candidates, and following them, the corporate media doesn't talk about it.
Right.
It should be a top campaign issue. It's a life or death issue. So that's what I think we need peace initiatives.
Well, I agree with you, and this is coming from a former Marine. You're no wimp.
I mean, people have a right to defend themselves. I have no problem with that. But when we go invading Iraq, it's not about defending us. I mean, all that nonsense about they participated in the 9/11 attacks, which wasn't true. Yeah. They had weapons of mass destruction, including a nuclear weapon that they might use on us. It wasn't true.
No.
And the intelligence community actually knew that. And we had intelligence people there like Scott Ritter and UN inspectors like Scott Ritter and Hans Blix that were saying, we've been scouring the country. There's nothing here. Let us keep looking. And, you know, Bush pulled them out because they had planned to go to war even before he got into office.
Right, I know. That's it's great. The odd thing is that it strikes me, although I think getting out of the nuclear treaty is the biggest disaster that has happened since he's been president, that Trump is a little more dovish than Biden.
Yeah, I don't think that's true. He says that, but the number of troops deployed in the Middle East and North Africa is up.
Right.
He's radically escalated drone strikes.
Right.
And special operations forces are still operating, doing missions in over 100 countries. So, you know, he says he's going to withdraw a couple thousand troops from Iraq. Yeah, well, we'll see. He said that about Syria.
Yeah.
And what he actually did was betray the Kurds who had fought ISIS. And then he said, oh, we're going to grab the oil fields as if it's our oil. You know, that's just old-fashioned imperialism.
Well, I just have a couple more questions for you. One is from my friend who's 12 years old, Johnny, in Las Vegas. And he wants to know, hold on one second. He wanted to know, he wanted to know what the difference is between you and Bernie Sanders and what you do, what your plan and your Green New Deal, why it's better than Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal.
Well, the big difference between me and Bernie Sanders is he didn't talk about these issues of militarism. He just really didn't have a big program in that, didn't emphasize it. On the Green New Deal, I have to say he was the only Democrat that had a serious plan. The rest of them were not serious. Mm-hmm. Now, his was 16.7 trillion or 16.3 trillion over 10 years. We're 27.5 trillion over 10 years because we want to zero out emissions by 2030. Right. His goal was 2050. Although I have to say he wanted to get energy and transportation sectors, which is a little bit over half the emissions, done by 2030. So I respect what he did. I think what we did and his policy people didn't do is we show our homework on our website. Mm-hmm. How much it's going to cost. We cite our sources, how many jobs it will create. And so you can see how we worked through it in that budget. His materials are just basically the conclusions, so you can't see their homework.
Right.
But, you know, I think Bernie had a good program, certainly the only serious one coming from a Democrat.
But, I mean, you go back with Bernie a long way. That was one of your first political things was working for his campaign in the 70s.
Yeah, back in the 70s. I think another difference between us is he just wants to tax the billionaire class. And the problem with that is that concentrated wealth, which they still retain, and you tax them to fund the social programs, that translates into concentrated political power, which means they can fight, resist, and roll back those programs. We want to have social ownership and democratic administration of major means of production, the big banks and industries. So they're under democratic control and not just a wealthy elite controlling them and through them the political process. So that's really democratic socialism that we're talking about. He was only really talking about New Deal liberalism. Now, I've known him long enough that he understands what I'm talking about, but he didn't campaign on it, and we are.
Right. Because the two questions with this would be, how these people that have the power now that control the banks, I mean, how are you going to get them to loosen control so you can take over the banks and take over and how do you ultimately pay for all this?
Well, the way to get control is to, like we did during World War II, say, this is in the public interest, we're taking over, we're going to compensate you, here are long-term bonds, you're still going to have plenty of money coming in, but they're now under democratic control. And how do we pay for it? Like any good business investment, over time, the revenue should cover the costs. So as we build these public housing and public energy and public transportation, we're going to get revenues from public housing rents, public transportation fares, electricity fees that's being produced through a public energy system. And that will cover the costs over the long term. That's one of the good things in Bernie's plan is he did want a public energy system expanding on the Federal Energy Administrations that we already have. And he did say his program would be paid for over the long term, which I think it would.
And the last question, which is a silly one, and I'm not going to ask about your accent, which is a very lilting, almost New Orleans accent, but you grew up in San Francisco. I've already heard about that. But the two main third-party candidates, the two that have a chance of becoming president from the Electoral College, are you, Howie Hawkins, and the Libertarian candidate, Joe Jorgensen. How did two illiterate names get on the ballot at the same time? How did this happen?
You mean JJ and HH?
Yeah.
I think it's just coincidence.
Okay, I just wanted to, I figured as much, but it's and let me tell you something. It's you've impressed me today. I got to tell you because I'm not, I'm a mix with my politics. I usually vote third party. The Democrats and Republicans have nothing for me, but I'm going to definitely go to your website, and give me the website again.
HowieHawkins.us.
HowieHawkins.us, and I'm very impressed that, like you said, you're not just taxing the rich. You have plans that that are going to get people back to work and make sure that everybody thrives.
That's right. That's the goal.
All right. Well, I got to tell you, you have my vote, Howie.
Thank you.
So you got my vote. You got Bree Walker's vote. So that's 2 in California, 2 in the bank for you. And I urge everybody that's listening to this to at least go to your website, look at what you're proposing, and check you out, and have an open mind. You don't have to vote for Trump. You don't have to vote for Biden. You vote for whoever you want. Any last words, Howie? I don't know how to end this.
I think what you said is important. Don't give away your vote. Don't give away your power. Vote for what you want and make the politicians come to you. If you settle for Biden and you're progressive, you're just basically silencing yourself. So vote for what you want and exercise your power.
And the main thing is, if you get 5%, you get matching funding for the next election. The Green Party does.
If we get 5%, we get $20 million at least for the general election for the Green ticket in the fall of 2024.
Because I got to tell you, the last time I was excited about politics, I went to a Ralph Nader rally in 2000 in Madison Square Garden. And so all the people that say Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the election, Ralph Nader was polling at 8% in October, got less than 3%. So who took votes away from who? And if Ralph Nader got 5%, you would be in a much stronger position right now.
Yeah, I think if we'd have done it that year, we would have been able to build upon it because we'd have had the resources. And back then, there was another pot of public money that was removed during the Obama administration. And it was the money that went to the major parties for their conventions.
Right.
But for the Green Party, it would have enabled us to help our state parties get better organized on their way to the convention. We could have used that money for that, but that money's been eliminated.
Right. Well, Howie, I started calling you Mr. Hawkins. I'm calling you Howie now. I
Yeah.
appreciate you. I know we're a little over time. I appreciate you sticking around with me, and good luck. I'm rooting for you to get 5%. You got my vote, and I hope everybody at least has an open mind, checks you out, because especially people who don't like the choices that you have with the Democrats and Republicans. What do you got to lose?
We got a lot to gain.
That's exactly.
I think the way to look at it.
Thanks a lot, Howie.
All right. Thank you.